time I learn something new, and that's fascinating. So you're in good hands.
All right, thanks everybody. It's nice to have you all here. My name is Clarke, and I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner. So I'm here today to talk to you about my little slice of the complementary alternative medicine world. And this is a field that I'm really passionate about. The handout that I had Krista email you to read was more an overview of complementary alternative medicine. It was from about 10 years ago. And in fact, I think this year is the year that they'll kind of update all of that research, so we're waiting for new numbers. But just even scanning through that document at that time, 10 years ago, that complementary alternative medicine was like the fastest rising field in medicine, and I would bet my salary that has really grown exponentially of people seeking out not alternative but complementary methods for healthcare and wellness. And at least my takeaway from that article is that really the best thing we can do in terms of participating with our own health and wellness is both allopathy or modern medicine and seeking out alternative therapies. Then we can get this really holistic experience. So even though I'm here to talk to you about Ayurveda, which is definitely complementary alternative, meaning not mainstream, I am not here to tell you to not go and see your doctor ever again. In fact, I had my knee reconstructed a year ago and it wasn't an Ayurvedic surgery, it was just a regular surgery. So sometimes we need to go to our modern medicine doctor, sometimes Ayurveda can help in other ways. So let's dive in. I'm going to start with a few slides that may be somewhat repetitious to you. I don't know, because I haven't been here for your other lectures. But I just wanted to bring up some basic statistics or numbers about, I would say, the state of wellness or the state of health in America today, or again, just anytime you see something like this, it's from the last time they did this research and published it, which was about 10 years ago. But particularly in this first slide, I mean, it's kind of depressing, but there's that overview, the first two bars that you see that are the really long ones that represent about 1 million deaths a year in America, primarily of heart disease, number one, still today leading cause of death in the US, and then the next one is all the forms of cancers. And I don't bring that up to depress you, just so we can get a look at the fact that at that point, it's about 1 in 4 deaths are attributed to heart disease and 1 in 4 are attributed to different cancers. And then you can just scan down the other ones that pop up, things like diabetes, Alzheimer's, things like that. So that's, even today, is what we're looking at. The bars have got longer, but those are still the 2 leading causes of death in the United States. And those are considered to be chronic diseases, right? Heart disease, stroke, cancer, type 2 diabetes, also obesity, arthritis are among the most common chronic diseases today. And what I wanted to point out here is that they're pretty preventable for the most part, meaning most of these are going to be the consequence of how we're living our lives and exogenous factors in terms of toxins in our environment. And of course there is a genetic factor, but these are primarily preventable. So as of 2012, half of all adults had 1 or more chronic health conditions in America, and 1 in 4 had 2 or more chronic health conditions. So these are also frequently sort of self-perpetuating. So you get one and then that leads to the next one. 7 of the top 10 causes of death, so 7 of the causes that you saw on the previous slide are considered chronic diseases. And then there, I already said that heart disease and cancer account for, then it was nearly half. Now again, I would bet my small annual salary, it's probably more than half. And then obesity is just another one that comes up as a serious health concern, and unless the numbers show something different when they publish the new research, that's probably also a trend that's continuing to grow. So that's the state of affairs just now. And chronic diseases, like I said, are largely preventable. They're largely the result of how we're living our lives. And what causes them are the health risk behaviors that are identified as unhealthy behaviors that we can change, right? So there's the good news. 4 of the health risk behaviors are lack of exercise, physical activity, poor nutrition, tobacco use, and then alcohol use or alcohol abuse, causing much of illness and suffering and early death related to chronic disease and conditions. So that's all great. So these are some of the common causes for chronic health, and chronic health are some of the common causes of death. Complementary alternative medicine, or at least Ayurveda, would say essentially the number one cause of chronic disease is going to be stress, right? Stress that's causing you to not eat well, or not drink well, or not absorb toxins from your food, or not exercise. So primarily what we're looking at in a wellness practice is how do we combat stress. And then you guys tell me what you think some of the leading causes. You're college students, so I know some of you have been stressed before. What do you think are some of the leading causes of stress for people today? School, work. Time management issues, yeah. Relationships.
Coping mechanisms.
Right, coping mechanisms or lack thereof. Yeah. Money. That's a big one. Anything else? A big one that I would say is it's often called isolation. But it's a sense of disconnection, right? We've kind of changed our society over decades and decades from being one in which your whole family lived with you in your home and you had all this support of your neighbors all around you, where instead we often tend to live as adults alone or just with your partner and your children. You know, we kind of put up walls to keep our neighbors out. And also, you know, Colorado's a little bit different in this, but not spending much time outdoors in nature, I would say, would be the norm most places in the country. So something that's really lending itself to trends of stress, which is then exacerbating this epidemic of chronic illness, would be the sense of isolation, right? Not feeling connected. And of course, nature is interconnected, but the sensation of not being connected is really sort of a leading factor these days in stress. So when we look at the concepts of health versus wellness, if you just look in the Oxford Dictionary, health is just defined as a state of not being sick, right? So that's a good start. But we're moving, as you now know, the fact that DU has a minor in wellness toward this trend of more of an expanded view of what wellness can be. It can be something that we can participate in, we can create. So the World Health Organization updated its definition of wellness, and it now applies this to the word health as well, as a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, right? We're physical, social beings, and not merely the absence of sickness, of disease. And then I really like the National Wellness Institute's definition of wellness, which is a conscious, self-directed and evolving process of achieving what's possible, your full potential. So this is where I feel complementary alternative medicine comes into play, right? Modern medicine is more of a curative approach. You get sick, you go to the doctor, you get a pill. And does it work? Most of the time, yeah. But the complementary alternative medicine side comes in as more of a preventative approach that's taking in the whole person, right? So physical, psychosocial. It's a conscious effort, right? It's something that we would actually all collectively decide. Again, all of nature is integrated by nature, interconnected. So something that we would consciously decide, like we want to direct ourselves towards a healthier future. And then with us being interconnected, the good thing is it starts with the individual, and then hopefully it spreads out to family unit, and then society, and then eventually maybe all the way around the globe. So this is really the goal of all the complementary alternative medicine practices, which we're going to look at in the next slide, is preventative care versus curative. Often by the point that you've become sick, then it's almost, I don't want to say too late for complementary alternative, but at that point modern medicine could probably do more to intervene, and then you could use both, like a two-pronged approach. But you all look young. I would say, like, get on board with a preventative approach now. You have so many years ahead of you. So what are some of these practices of complementary and alternative medicine? So they're non-mainstream. Health and wellness therapies are used in conjunction with allopathy, which is just a fancy word for modern medicine. Ayurveda is only at the top because that's what we're going to talk about today, so we'll dive more into that in a moment. But practices like traditional Chinese medicine, out of which comes acupuncture. That's a practice where they look at what are called the meridians, so energetic pathways in the body, and freeing the flow of energy through those meridians. Osteopathy, yoga is a big popular one in the US, as well as Tai Chi. Chiropractic is also considered a complementary and alternative medicine, although I think it's considered maybe a little more mainstream than some of the other ones here. Homeopathy, there's a bullet missing there, but massage and meditation are considered to be some of the primary complementary and alternative medicine practices. And then these are used 10 years ago. These were being used and sought out by 36% of adults in the US. Again, I'm willing to bet that's at least half of the population now. So I think we're trending in a great direction. Right? And also, even 11% of people were taking their kids to seek out these practices as well, which is fantastic. And then this just represents the popularity of these different practices. I know this one is hard to see, but I can read it on my computer. But things like natural products would be the most used, and that would even, as far as I'm aware, that includes like going into Whole Foods and buying like, you know, natural vitamins, things like that. But then deep breathing is the next one that people reported that they used. And meditation. So people are seeking out all different kinds of practices as an approach to maintain their wellness on top of what we would call traditional measures. So Ayurveda, which is what I'm here to talk to you about, it means the science of life. So it's a Sanskrit word, just like yoga is a Sanskrit word that is often translated as union or wholeness. Its sister science is Ayurveda, and that means science of life. So it originated in the same place that yoga originated, in India. We think around 2500 before Common Era. So it's been around quite a long time. And in fact, it's kind of considered the original science of medicine. It's considered to be the grandfather of traditional Chinese medicine. Actually, those should be switched. It's the father of Chinese medicine and the grandfather of allopathy, of modern medicine. So it doesn't look a lot like modern medicine, but we believe that a lot of the approach of modern medicine in terms of how we create cures comes from Ayurvedic wisdom. It's a holistic science, and that means that it treats the whole person. So not just symptoms, first of all, not just physical body even, but physical, psychosocial, right? And it's very comprehensive in terms of its approach. If you were to go and see an Ayurvedic doctor, you would certainly receive lots of recommendations about things like your diet and your routine. There's also a whole section of it that's devoted to using herbs as medicine. But there's things like Vedic psychology. It was a consciousness-based approach, so often you would be prescribed some of the treatments that you saw on the previous slide, things like meditation and deep breathing, things like that too. So very comprehensive approach aimed at creating wellness as this evolving and intentional approach, preventative approach. And then all of these strategies are pretty simple for the most part. Don't eat this, eat that. They're pretty effective, I have to say. You know, I've been treating people as a practitioner for about 5 years now, and I've seen major transformation with just small things. Again, don't eat this, eat that, go to bed earlier, things like that. It can be pretty effective just in terms of health and wellness and prevention-oriented wellness. So here in Colorado, we do have an incredible Ayurvedic doctor named John Deweyard. He lives just up the road near Boulder. And I love his take on Ayurveda as recognizing all of life, right? It's the science of life, not the science of human existence, but all of life, that we have to live in harmony with nature in order to survive. So what I spoke about just a moment ago about this sense of isolation or disconnection that so many of us are feeling as being a leading cause of stress, which is a leading cause of chronic disease, The opposite of that would be living in harmony with nature. And we'll talk this afternoon about what that looks like on a practical level. But just the way you would get an owner's manual for your car that speaks of like, okay, get an oil change every 3 months, I think. But Ayurveda has these same recommendations that seasonally there are certain little touch-ups you can do to your diet and routine that will help maintain your longevity, right? But the key thing in Ayurveda is living a lifestyle that's in harmony with the changing cycles of nature. And it's something that we've moved away from a bit, right? We can create these artificial environments where it can be light all the time or a certain temperature all the time. And then many of us are working 8, 9, 10 hours a day in an artificially created environment that never changes. So we've really created a separation between ourselves and the universe that we live in. Of course, nothing can really happen in the universe without your physiology knowing about it. But we've created some separation, and Ayurveda would argue that to be healthy and live a long and happy and satisfying existence, we want to make sure that we're staying connected to what is the sun doing, right? Is it up? If so, we should be awake and active. Is it down, right? It's nighttime, like we should be resting. So just simple things like that mean living in harmony with nature. And then small seasonal shifts that we would make as well, which we'll look at. Key to Ayurvedic theory is what's called 5-element theory. So we're living in harmony with nature. Ayurveda views everything in the natural world through the lens of the 5 elements, which in Ayurveda are earth, water, fire, air, and space. Chinese medicine has different 5 elements, but same underlying concept. So Ayurveda doesn't view you separately from the natural world, even though we may live in a way that is kind of separate from the natural world. It sees all of the natural world through the lens of the 5 elements. So for example, the earth element, Ayurveda would say things like your physical attributes, your hair, your nails, your teeth, your skin and muscles and bones, it would view those through the lens of the earth element. A sense of steadiness, stability, grounding, heavy, strength, rooting, right? And then there's some qualities there that are a bit more psychosocial, things like patience and forbearance. But everything that you would think about, like if you just next time you're out on a hike, just get down and touch the earth, how does it feel? Firm, cool, stable. This is the earth element. So everything that's quite sort of tangible in your physical body, Ayurveda would view through the lens of the earth element. Each of the elements also has a correlation with one of the 5 senses too. So earth element with your sense of smell. We know that when we go out on a hike at this time of year where everything's kind of thawing and there's more of that smell of not just earth but like decay as well, right? So we'll look at each of the senses as well. Ayurveda views things like your body fluids, all the lubrication in your body, like the synovial fluid in your synovial joints, for example, or your saliva, digestive juices. All of this, we know that we're like 60 to 70% water. Ayurveda would say yes. We are viewed through the lens of the water element as well. What are the qualities of the water element? Everything that you think of with a river or the ocean or a lake. It's wet, for example. Fluid, can be malleable. Really, it sort of takes up whatever shape it's in, right? Tidal currents, it's adaptable, cool. And it's associated with your sense of taste, right? So we need a little bit of saliva in order to eat and to taste our food. Ayurveda views things like your metabolism, digestion, hormones through the lens of the fire element. Fire we think of as transforming. Here in Colorado, when you're driving on the highway, you might see a sign that says we're doing a burn, please don't call in to 911, right? They're burning dead trees on the hillside. It has a transforming effect on nature, right? It allows regeneration and growth. So anything in your body that's regenerating itself, which hopefully is everything all the time, right? Your cells are metabolizing themselves. Your body is transforming oxygen into carbon dioxide with every breath. All of this would be seen through the transforming lens of the fire element. And the fire element is intense and hot and sharp, just like fire. It's associated with your sense of vision. Without fire, there's no light, and without no light, there's no vision. Ayurveda views things like movement in your body, which is also always happening all the time, through the air element. So all movement, right? Things like respiration, circulation, also communication. But even just the movement of your limbs, the movement of your food through your digestive tract, this is all governed by the air element, or seen through the lens of the air element in Ayurveda, which is clear, moving, dry, light, breathing, feeling, cold. And it's associated with your sense of touch. It's the same way we can feel the wind on your skin, but you can't really see the wind, right? And then last of all is the space element, which is not really an element. In fact, if I did a little sidebar here, space is just the permission that has to exist in order for there to be the other 4 elements, right? So it's like definitely the most subtle, maybe the hardest to understand. But the understanding is that in order for there to be a universe, in order for there to be nature, and for us to have an experience, there must first be an arena in which we can exist. Once there's a space, there tends to be some movement, right, of things moving around in that space. And if I was to start going backwards, that movement would be the air element. And then once you have enough movement, you get friction, which is heat, which is seen through the lens as the fire element. That heat creates liquefaction, which is water. And when that congeals or solidifies, you have the earth element. So we think of the elements often from gross to subtle, earth, water, fire, air, and space. But in fact, the understanding would be space comes first, permission to exist comes first, then movement, then friction, liquefaction, and then finally solidification. But getting back to that permission to exist, how does that look in your body? It would just be things like the spaces that are in your body, which also have to be there for you to exist, right? You don't digest your food if there's not enough space in your stomach, for example. So we have spaces like your abdominal cavity, your thoracic cavity, your cranial cavity, spaces in all of your joints that allow for movement. If we lose those spaces, our joints become impinged or without movement. And then even like the tiny spaces like the pores in your skin, for example. And the energetic qualities of the space element are that it's clear, expanding, light, free, it's empty, it's everywhere, and it is connected to your sense of hearing. So this is the fundamental concept, I think, of Ayurveda, is the 5-element theory, is that you and everything in nature are seen through the lens of these 5 elements. And then quantum science, which came about quite a bit later than Ayurveda, came up with the same basic principle, which was that everything in the universe is formed out of about 6 basic ingredients, except instead of calling them earth and water and fire and air and space, they're things like carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen and oxygen and phosphorus, right? It's the same concept, but with different terms, and more microscopes and telescopes and research to back it up. What's really the most fun and interesting and compelling part, I think, of Ayurveda is something that some of you may have heard of, which is called tridosha theory. Tri is 3 in Sanskrit, right? So it's 3 dosha. And what does dosha mean? Well, it's usually translated as body type, which is not really what it means. But that works in terms of like a clinical application. A dosha actually is something that can become imbalanced, something that could create possibility for disease, right, or not wellness. So the 3 doshas are basically a way of grouping the 5 elements together to make things a bit simpler. That's always the way I've viewed it, is this just makes 5-element theory even simpler. So Ayurveda would say that each person possesses a unique combination of the 5 elements, right? It sees all of you through the lens of the 5 elements. So we all have to have all 5 to be here and exist and to be able to see and hear and touch and taste and smell. But the way they show up in each of us is a bit different, which is why we can all have the same basic ingredients and not look the same or sound the same or have the same ideas, right? So same ingredients, but what we do with them is a bit different. So you could say that each of us has a predominance of 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 elements that might make us kind of like a fiery person, right? Or maybe you're a very earthy, practical, grounded person. maybe you have a lot of the air element and you fidget a lot and like to move around a lot. And then these doshas, so they show up just in how we are as people, but they also show up in things like nature, the seasons, the time of day, and over the course of your whole life, this is called kala, you'll have a predominance of different doshas, or different elements, right? But to make it pretty simple, Ayurveda says that each of us is born with a very unique predisposition to certain elements. And you kind of have that throughout your whole life, right? So if you're born an earthy person, you'll always be pretty earthy. Born fiery, you'll always be kind of fiery. Everything else, though, is always changing, right? Seasons are always changing, clock is always ticking. Unfortunately, we're getting older. So everything else is changing, and that's influencing us from the outside. And that's really this is what Ayurveda is the most interested in, is these 3 doshas, which are usually called body types. I think of them as like fault lines where disconnect or disease can happen. Some of you are going to be more inclined towards, I'll say, imbalances that are more fiery in nature, like heartburn or inflammation. Some of you will never have heartburn a day in your life, but you may be more inclined to have imbalances that are a bit more, we'll say, airy in nature. Like maybe you always have bloating and gas after you eat your lunch, and some of you will never experience that in your whole life. So we all have our own cross to bear, but Ayurveda is really concerned with, okay, where in this little image of earth, water, fire, air, and space, and we'll talk about the other words in a moment, where do you have the most inclination for imbalance? Once we figure that out, there's a lot that you can do to make sure that you never have heartburn again, right? Often it's just, don't eat that, eat this instead. So the first dosha that we look at is Vata dosha, which is a combination of the air and space elements, right? Remember I said, we usually think about the elements from earth to space, but Ayurveda would think about space to earth. So I will start with Vata dosha. This is a combination of the air and space elements. The reason that I had put things like the energetic qualities of air and space were just to get you thinking about what do air and space feel like, right? Air was clear and moving and dry and light. Space, clear, expanding, light, right? So Vata dosha, of its combination of those 2 elements, is going to feel a lot like that, right? This is the lens through which Ayurveda views things like your movements. That's elimination, circulation, neurology, communication. And its qualities are the qualities of air and space elements, right? Just the way we think about what does the wind feel like, right? It's like moving and cold and rough and it dries your skin. So it's possible that some of you in this room were born from an Ayurvedic standpoint with more of a tendency towards air and space elements in your nature. Right? It would be dryness, which could be just like how you tend to have dry skin, right? You always have. Lightness could be like a smaller, lighter body type, like Tinkerbell. And then a lot of movement is the big thing about Vata dosha, right? It's like the wind is always moving, like Tinkerbell is always flitting around everywhere. So before I show the next slide, just a reminder that everyone is viewed for the lens of all 5 elements, right? So Ayurveda would say you all have all 5, right? Nobody is Tinkerbell. No one is just all air and space, right? But some of us may have more of these elements, and Ayurveda would call that Vata dosha. And again, that's a Sanskrit word, right? Vata meaning like air or breath or wind, right? So a person that has a lot of Vata dosha would have a light, thinner build, typically, or naturally, I would say. Would perform activity quickly, right? Get things done quickly. Would kind of do everything quickly. Tendency to dry skin, usually an aversion to cold weather. Right? And they often will feel cold, like cold hands and feet, which in modern terms we would call circulation issues, right? And circulation is movement, and movement is Vata dosha. A key a key identifying factor of a Vata person is general irregularity. So irregularity in when you feel hungry, right? And then irregularity in your capacity to digest foods. Sometimes you can eat a meal and feel great afterwards, sometimes gas and bloating afterwards, sometimes it takes 5 hours to digest your meal. Generally, there's a quickness to Vata dosha, so they're quick to pick up new concepts, but also very quick to forget them. A tendency toward emotional responses to stress, such as worry and anxiety, nervousness and restlessness. So some of you, that may be your typical response to stress. Some of you will never feel anxious a day in your life, lucky you. But you have other problems that we'll talk about. Tendency towards digestive complaints like constipation, which is really just dryness in the colon, gas and bloating, and often a tendency toward light and interrupted sleep. And this would be something that, like, if this started when you started college, it may be more of a stress response. But some people have always had light and interrupted sleep their whole lives, and so that's usually a good indication that there's predominance of Vata dosha. So that's Tinkerbell. Then we get to the fire element. So again, we're grouping together some of the elements. What's called Pitta dosha would be the combination of fire with a little bit of water, but mostly fire, right? So here's our Tasmanian devil archetype, if you like, of a person that has a lot of fire, a lot of heat. So this is what, because of the fire element, it's going to govern all of the transformation processes in your body, your ability to digest your food, but also to digest and process all of your experiences, your emotions, for example. Processing information. This is all under the umbrella of Pitta dosha. So we all have some of us have more, right? Or more of a tendency toward the fire element. And those qualities, again, fire is hot and sharp and intense, and it's dynamic, it's moving, right, for the most part. So a person that has a bit more of the fire element is going to look a bit different from Tinkerbell, from our Vata dosha person, okay? So more fire, and also more medium, I guess, is a way of thinking about it. Like Vata's light body frame, light body weight. Pitta dosha body type would be more medium, right? Maybe you can build some muscle, for example. Performs activity at a medium speed. This person usually doesn't like really hot weather. Right? Vata dosha didn't like cold. Pitta dosha usually doesn't like hot. Sharp hunger and digestion. You never want to get between a pitta and their next meal. They do not like to skip meals. They get hangry. They take a medium time to pick up new information, medium time to forget. So medium retention. They have a tendency toward more irritability and anger, competitiveness and judgment, a bit more critical. They're a bit sharper, right? Sharpness was one of the qualities of the fire element. So someone with more pitta, more fire, would have often a sharper mind. So they can be quite critical of others. Whereas Vata dosha was more prone to like anxiety and worry. They're often very enterprising and sharp in character. I think of them as very organized people. They like things to be systematic. They like logic and reason. Prefer cold things because they always feel hot. And often tendency toward reddish complexion, red hair, and good speakers. So that gives us two of the three doshas, two of the three, we'll say, body types, right? Vata was a bit more light and airy. I think of a modern term for a Vata person would be like mercurial. So you guys, you've heard that word before. So Vatas are often very like creative, and they like to be inspired, and they often are, you know, already practicing yoga and meditation. Pittas are more like type A, is what I think of for a Pitta person. So they need a bit more reason and rationale, and they're a bit sharper. But then we have our lovely Kapha dosha to come and balance everything out, right? Kapha is like the glue that holds everything together. It's the grounding and the structure to our existence. We all have some Kapha dosha, fortunately. Kapha is mostly earth element, which of course we think of as grounded, stable, structure, a little bit of water. And Kapha, of course, in Ayurveda governs structure. So when we looked at the earth element, it was things like skin and muscles and bones. Because it is some water element, the lubrication in your body as well, that's also necessary for existence. And there are its qualities: it's heavy, stable, slow, cool, and sticky. So if you have more of Kapha dosha, or more of earth element, what does that look like? Well, Kapha person is going to have more of a solid or heavier build, possibly heavier body weight. And with that comes greater strength and endurance. So in fact, these people make great marathon runners. Tend to be slow and methodical in terms of their movements. Vata was sort of quick and irregular. Pitta has sharp, precise movements. Kaphas are slow and methodical. Right? We don't value that so much in our culture. So, especially if we have a lot of Pitta, we get exasperated at our friends that have more Kapha. But they're methodical, right? Taking their time, processing information, doing it right. Often oilier skin. They tend to have a slower digestive capacity and milder hunger. They often will eat a meal, feel full for a long time, right? Even if they didn't eat very much. And then a tranquil and steady personality, which is quite a lovely balance for our Vata types and our Pitta types. They're very patient and loyal and tolerant people, which are all also qualities that we can learn, but this comes naturally to the Kapha disposition, right? So there's things we can learn, of course. We can all change our personalities, we can use stress reduction measures, but some of us just come into the world certain ways, right? So the Kapha person comes into the world pretty patient and steady. They're slower to pick up new information, but also slow to forget. So, like an elephant, they never forget. An elephant is like a Kapha. I think of an elephant as being a very Kapha animal, right? It's big and strong and moves slowly for the most part. Whereas your Vata type was a bit more prone to anxiety, and your Pitta type was a bit more prone to anger. Kaphas are more prone to depression, a sense of existential heaviness, psychological heaviness, laziness, sort of lethargy, not really wanting to start new projects or get moving in life. And they tend to be able to sleep for a long time, very heavy and deep sleep, unmedicated, right? This would be their natural form, natural state. So, do you want to know what dosha you might be? Okay. So I'll pass these around, and then I'll pass them around, and let me explain one thing about them, and then you guys can do them. Do you need to take yours again?
I know mine.
It hasn't changed. So what I'm passing around is a dosha questionnaire, and you can find a million of these online. They're all slightly different, but this one has the categories that, through my own studies, I think are the most important. And this is kind of a fun way just to get an idea of how the Ayurvedan would view you through this lens of the 5 elements, right? And there'll probably be extras, I'm sure. This isn't a particularly conclusive or comprehensive approach because it's just a questionnaire, right? In fact, if I was to sit down, or when I do sit down and do a consultation with someone, it's, a couple of hours that I spend with them. So this can give you an idea. And in fact, me just talking about them might have given you some idea. So the one thing I want to point out is if you look at this, the first column where it says feature, and then you see things that we've already talked about, like body frame and temperature preference. The next column says relative score. And that means that for some of these features, you may fall into more than one category. You can split the number. So not all of them, but let's say about halfway down where it says typical emotional response to stress. If you feel that sometimes you get anxious, but other times you get angry, well, you have 5 points. You can divide it up any way you want, 1 and 4, 2.5 and 2.5. Right? So why don't you go ahead and go through for each feature, assign the right number of points in each column, and then you'll add them up at the bottom. Take a couple of minutes and then we'll talk about it. And wave if you have questions, or just ask. Exactly. So under body weight, you have 7.5, and you would, for that, you could put all in one. Yeah, and they're all a bit different depending on how important they're considered to be. Share with me, there's 3 numbers at the bottom. Share with us.
So I had 13, 24.5.
Tell me again. First one.
I had 13.
13?
Yeah, 24.5
and 10 for the last one. 13, 24.5, and 10. So that's more of an even spread than we often see, but the predominance would be pitta, right? At that kind of spread, we would probably, tell me your name?
Grayson.
We would probably just call Grayson more of a pitta predominant type person, so maybe a little bit more of the fire element. Does that feel true in any of the categories for you? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, some of them. Probably. Yeah, for like the body frame. Just put like medium.
Yeah, Yeah, it's kind of it's a bit more of an even spread than you often see. So for someone like him, we might say, okay, more pitta, but it sounds like there's also some vata and some kapha, which is...
Yeah, 'cause I hate being super cool.
All right.
Since I was a kid, I was
So that's vata
That's vata.
for sure. No, I'm glad that you went first because it's really easy for me to throw slides of like Tinkerbell, Tasmanian Devil, and ER up, and we all think that we're just going to fall into one of those categories, but most of us don't, right? Like there are some actual ERs in life, but most of us do feel like we're more like that, where it's like, well, this is true, you know, I'm like, you know, I'm very organized, but I hate being cold, right? So it's pitta and vata. Did anyone have more of like almost everything in one?
My numbers were 41, 8, and 6.
All right.
So I guess just with like my body weight and body type, I've always been very like little.
Mhm.
And then I'm always cold, so I definitely prefer hot temperatures. It's always like a thing in my apartment. My roommates always like it super hot, like super cold, and I'm like, no, I need hot. And then I guess my appetite is always different. Sometimes I'll be fine just eating a little bit, but other times I can just like keep eating.
All right, so we have more of a classic Tinkerbell in our midst. I don't know if that's actually your name. What's your name? Patrice. So Patrice would categorize more clearly in that vata dosha type, right? So it's a little more easier. It's a little easier clinically, right? But everyone's going to come up in different ways. So for Patrice, she already shared, like, yeah, I do always feel cold and like I have some irregularity in terms of digestion. What was your score? I saw your hand go up.
Yeah. Well, mine was like the opposite. First of all, I'm an earth sign, so I like thought I would just really be that. And when you're talking, I was like, okay, this air sign sounds a lot like me in a lot of ways. Then I took this, and I mean, I wasn't at all about it. I was like 5, 20, 17. So I was like,
So pitta kapha, interesting. And that's not what you expected.
I expected to be like mostly an earth sign,
Mostly earth.
but I don't know.
17 is a lot in earth though. I think that's a good, I mean, there's only like 47.5 possible points in this questionnaire. So I think that's a pretty good spread.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for someone like, tell me your name? Leah? Clea. So for someone like Clea, she had slightly more pitta, but it was almost the same pitta and kapha. So in Ayurveda, we would just call her a pitta kapha type, right? Some of you would be more vata, some of you some predominance of pitta, but I think you ended up being like pitta vata kapha or something like that. So the lesson is that all of us are all three in different amounts. It's possible that you could get 0 on the questionnaire, but that doesn't mean you don't have any of that, right? It's just like small, and we probably wouldn't ever have to treat it. If you had nothing show up in the first column, I would assume I probably never have to treat you for anxiety or bloating, right? You just don't have those air and space type problems. But if you had a lot in pitta, for example, I'm going to assume with certain lifestyle behaviors, you may have an excess of fire element. So you might be more prone to frustration or anger or hyperacidity, something like that. So the dosha questionnaire, it's fun. It's not objective because you're taking it about yourself and you're not objective about yourself, but it's a place that we can start, right? Another thing that you can do that I think is really fun, I went on a walk yesterday with my friend in Boulder and we did this for every cartoon we could think of, but it's just to take some kind of, usually a TV show that has like different archetypes, and try to assign them to the characters. So we did this for like Ren and Stimpy, Family Guy, you can do it for SpongeBob SquarePants, like all of the Disney movies, the Seven Dwarfs, but it's actually a really fun way to apply Vata, Pitta, and Kapha to different characters. And just we can think of the doshas as being archetypes. So what would you say of these three, who would you say is the most Kapha? Homer, right? He likes to sit on the couch and eat. Kapha was a little prone to a little more lazy, right? Who do you think is the most Pitta? Bart? Tell me why.
I feel like Lisa has a lot of energy.
True. Yeah, Lisa's super energetic. Can you get this wrong? No, I think she's the type A one, is the thing. Yeah, when I think of Lisa, I think she's super art and she's like a know-it-all, right?
I also feel like she has a lot of anxiety. Maybe I'm just misreading that.
Yeah. So maybe she's more of a Pitta Vata or a Vata Pitta. You're right, she does have anxiety, right? And then Homer, Bart rather, I guess I think of as Vata because he's like crazy and all over the place and always like up to mischief and stuff like that. So in a way to integrate these three archetypes is just whatever your show is that you watch, is to try and pick who's the most Kapha, who's the most Vata, who's the most Pitta. The thing is that in order to tell a story, you kind of must have all three, right? Vata moves things along, it's movement. Pitta transforms obstacles into opportunities. And then Kapha is the structure that holds everything together. It's like we did it for Winnie the Pooh, and it's like Kanga was like the most nurturing and kind and loving that we came up with. So there has to be each of these to tell any story. And in fact, for us to be productive in life, I think there has to be all three. Like if you're forming an organization or a business and you've identified that you might have a lot of Vata, so you can get projects moving, but you maybe don't have the best problem-solving skills, or you don't have that sort of integrating quality of Kapha, you want to find two people that have those qualities. So what I love about Ayurveda is like it helps us identify our strengths and our weaknesses, and it encourages us to surround ourselves with people that fill those exciting gaps so that we can be the most productive moving forward. So how does this help us though in terms of health and wellness? Well, really, the most important thing of Ayurveda is tridosha theory, which is this idea that each of us is born with a predominance of one or two of the doshas. Occasionally, I have someone fill this out and it's like almost equal all the way across. It's not really more balanced, it's just like more to work on sometimes. Or we just have to figure out where do you get imbalanced, right? But most of us, I would say, if I was to collect them, which I'm not going to, you can keep them, but if I was to collect them, I would see most of us have a predominance of one or two of the doshas. So that's like a fundamental principle of Ayurveda, is tridosha theory. And then the second most important thing is, what do we do with that information? We use it to promote our health and well-being because it helps us identify where we can become imbalanced, right? What are our tendencies? Where are our weak spots? This concept in Sanskrit is called Vishesha, and we translate it as meaning the principle of opposites, like yin and yang. So you can see how traditional Chinese medicine then came from Ayurveda with its fundamental concepts of there essentially always being two opposing factors with whatever experience we're discussing. So Vishesha would mean opposite in Ayurveda, and it says the opposite elements diminish a dosha. So someone that has a tendency towards a lot of pitta dosha, a lot of fire, Ayurveda would introduce, well, what do you think would be the opposite, the most, I'll give you a clue, quenching for the fire element? Water, right? So we would extinguish flames with water. Someone that has a lot of vata dosha, so very light and moving and airy, what would be the most, I'll say, pacifying, the most opposite in terms of elements for vata dosha? Earth, right? It's the most grounding. So then, conversely, kapha dosha tends towards more earth, so that person would want air as their balancing element, right? More lightness and movement. Vishesha is the principle of opposites. Samanya is the principle of similarities, right? It's the opposite, which would say that similar elements augment a dosha. Meaning that if we have someone with a lot of pitta, a lot of fire, and we want to put them out of balance for some reason, we just keep adding more and more fire, right? more fuel onto the fire. So that might look like that person eating lots of hot, spicy foods and doing like hot Bikram yoga and then going out for a run in the hot sun and the summer, right? So we're just applying heat on top of heat. To put Vata dosha out of balance, which is air and space and light and moving and cold, we would apply lifestyle behaviors and foods that have those similar attributes. Foods that are cold and dry, processed foods, things like that. A very irregular lifestyle, right? If I wanted to give if I wanted to give you anxiety, I'd be like, okay, go to bed at a different time every day, eat all of your meals off schedule, right? Always be moving and on the go. That's gonna increase Vata over time for you to the point where you might end up with anxiety or insomnia, something like that. And then of course, Kapha dosha, more earth element, heavy, stable. If I want to give that person obesity and depression, I'm gonna put that person on the couch, feed them lots of heavy foods, no exercise, right? So it's simple. It translates into modern thought in terms of things like weight gain, anxiety, inflammation, things like that, right? Earth, air, fire. So remember I said that we usually hear about the doshas as meaning body types, but in actuality, dosha means that which can become imbalanced. It's like a fault line in your health and well-being, where we have more of a propensity towards certain imbalances. So the wisdom is, what we can do with this to apply it to our own lives, is that balancing the doshas, meaning balancing the elements contained therein, is the key to managing stress and promoting wellness. If we take an expanded view of stress as just being everything that puts pressure on your system, your physiology, so everything from eating the wrong types of food, or eating at the wrong time, or not getting enough sleep, or sleeping at the wrong time, in addition to all the things that you mentioned, right? Relationships and money and that feeling of isolation. All of these, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, are going to trigger an increase of certain elements, and therefore a decrease of other ones, right? So things that trigger more air and space will increase Vata. Things that trigger fire element would increase Pitta. Things that trigger earth element would increase Kapha. So balancing the doshas, or balancing the elements with opposites, is the key to wellness in Ayurveda. So we're always just paying attention, observing. As I said, Ayurveda and complementary and alternative medicine generally is preventative, and it's a consciousness-based approach. So we're kind of checking in daily now, and like, how do I feel today? Do I feel hot? Do I feel like acidic after breakfast? Okay, maybe I have too much fire. Can I apply more water? And we'll look at what that would look like practically, for example. So consciousness-based checking in, feeling, if you feel fine, great. Then the doshas are balanced, the elements are balanced, you're doing great. But anytime you feel like, I don't feel like myself, or I don't feel super inspired, and I usually do, I don't really want to get out of bed, then is a time where we can apply simple, practical, effective strategies that come from Ayurveda. So to balance Vata dosha, to balance maybe that excess of air or wind, which could show up as things like being underweight, constipation, nervous, anxious, not sleeping well. So Ayurveda would just take all of these and group them as too much Vata, right? It's just like a simplifying process. One of my favorite teachers describes how the difference between the allopathic, the modern medicine approach, and the Ayurvedic approach would be like a ballerina living in New York City who's already probably got a really small light body frame, and then is being encouraged to have a small light body frame, so she's not eating enough, or he's not eating enough. You know, and then a lot of pressures of the job and performing, and plus it's a very active job that requires a lot of movement, eating on a regular schedule, not getting to bed early, because presumably he or she performs at night, right? That person would be prone to these imbalances that are listed up here, right? Whereas his or her counterpart who has more Kapha dosha, more of that heavy, earthy, stable, it would be very hard to get that person to feel anxious or to be underweight, right? But that person would have his or her own set of problems, right? So whereas Vata dosha loves this movement and being out in the city and being creative, Kapha dosha kind of likes being on the couch and eating comfort foods and watching like the same movies over and over again. And so Kapha dosha, as we'll see when we get to that slide, would be more prone to heaviness, gaining weight, often like head colds, because it's earth and water. It's a lot of like mucousy type imbalances, so like head colds and sinus infections and ear infections, everything that makes you feel heavy, depression. So of course I think modern medicine would treat those two people differently, for sure, but modern medicine would for sure just probably for the most part treat the symptoms, right? So Vata dosha goes to the doctor with underweight, constipation and anxiety and insomnia, definitely going to get a pill to help him or her sleep and deal with anxiety. I don't know if they give you pills to gain weight, but tell you to eat more, right? Well, Kapha dosha could go to the doctor with like weight gain and a head cold and depression, and he's going to get different medicine for losing weight and depression and the head cold. So they're going to get different prescriptions from modern medicine, but basically they're going to get medicine, right? They're going to get pills of some kind. Ayurveda would say, look, it's simpler than that, right? We don't need to treat the symptoms, we need to treat the root cause, which is the way that you're living is creating an imbalance at the elemental level, at the subtle level. So, Vata dosha needs to spend more time on the couch, eating comfort foods, resting. Kapha dosha needs to get out and do more of what Vata dosha is doing, be moving and be social and stimulated. So it's just giving them qualities that are the opposite. And this is the other thing that we didn't mention when it comes to complementary and alternative medicine, is they're generally holistic and preventative, but they're also generally quite individualized. So it's not one pill for all people, it's not one program for everybody, but different strokes for different folks. So knowing that Vata dosha is a bit more prone to underweight, constipation, anxiety, etc. This is caused usually by stress, excessive movement, right? So oftentimes the thing is, like, we like things that are like us already. It's also that principle of samanya, similarities. So if you're already light and moving all the time and your mind is always going and you're always fidgeting and restless, you generally will be like, I'm going to go for a run, and then I'm going to take a yoga class, and then I'm going to go lift weights, and then I'm going to go for a bike ride. It's like too much movement. So that would be like excessive movement. We think exercise is generally great for everybody, but that would be excessive movement. Vatas don't like excessive cold, but excessive cold would be exacerbating for them. So like I have a patient who is as Vata as a person can be, I think. Like she's the modern equivalent of, the human equivalent of Tinkerbell. But she also likes, because of that, she likes to go skinning, right? She likes to ski uphill for like 13 miles and then ski back downhill for 13 miles. And so being outside with excessive movement and often in very cold weather, right? She tends to have a lot of like neurological related issues like tinnitus, doesn't sleep very well, things like that. So that would be like excessive movement, excessive cold. Dry light foods are generally processed foods, right? Things that come in packages that are crunchy, chips and popcorn and things like that. And a regular routine is common. Vata doshas tend to have an irregular routine, and then that makes them more Vata, right? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, because on the questionnaire it says like Vata under physical strain, energy, and stamina, it's like says that they have very low.
Mm-hmm.
And that the Kapha has like a high energy. So when I was taking that and I read that, like I'm the kind of person to like be working out all the time. Like if I can get myself into that mindset, like I will not stop moving. But like my personality itself is different. Like I don't know, like I'm a very chill person, but I like will get myself to go and do things like all day if need be. So I don't know. I'm just like confused, I guess.
Then, so when you get going and you're moving and moving and moving, do you burn out and need to take like a 10-hour nap, or you can just keep going? You have a motor that keeps going once it gets going?
It just like depends, I guess. I don't know. I feel like I get into routines, but then like I can easily fall out of those routines. Not in like a lazy way, just like I don't know, just be doing other things, and then I'll like
Yeah, so the way that Ayurveda would classify the three would be, and it's a good question, is Vatas feel like they have boundless energy. They're like, oh my god, I can do everything. But then they at some point crash and burn, right? Pittas have that kind of medium energy where they can just chug, chug, chug along. Kaphas are prone to being lazy, so they don't want to do a lot of stuff. Once they get going though, they can go forever, right? They have that incredible longevity and stamina. Yeah, it's kind of like, it was like an old steam engine, like it takes a while to get going, but then they can go forever. And they won't crash and burn. So does that help clarify a little bit? Like Vatas can feel like they have tons of energy, and they do, but they don't have the stamina to support it.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kaphas don't have much energy, but they have the stamina to support it. They just need a good prod.
How do you mean season of increase?
Okay, so balancing Vata dosha. So we see what the imbalances look like, some of the causes. And then each of the doshas is going to have a season where we all experience more of the qualities of that dosha, right? So remember way back at the beginning I said Ayurveda views all of nature through the lens of the 5 elements. So your body, sure, we figured out like we each have a dosha type or predominance, but then it was also like time of day and where you are in your life, and seasons are a big one. So we think of, at least here, we have 4 seasons, right? In Ayurveda, there's 3 seasons. And depending on where you are in the world, they happen at different times. Some of them happen twice in the 12-month cycle. But for us, what we think of as fall, and probably the first part of winter, is what we would call Vata season, when there is more of a predominance of the qualities of light, dry, cold, moving. Think about that time of year, right? Maybe the wind picks up, temperatures start to cool down after summer. So that's more Vata, right? Vata's cold. And fall is dry, right? The leaves dry up and fall off the trees. We often get dry skin, chapped lips. So we think of that as being a predominance of air and space elements and their qualities, which equals Vata season. So in fall, generally we'll all feel more Vata. Now if you already have a ton of Vata, that fall season might really affect you, right? You might, like that might be when you have anxiety the most, or you don't sleep, or you just have really dry skin. If you really Kapha, you probably feel the best at this time of year, where it's like, I feel quite light, maybe I will go for a jog instead of sitting on the couch today, right? So it won't affect us all in the same way, but we will all feel an increase of air and space element. Make sense? So, when we're experiencing an increase of Vata dosha, perhaps it's fall, perhaps you've just been doing excessive movement in cold weather, perhaps you've been eating a lot of cold dry foods, perhaps you just are prone, you're more Vata dosha. We balance with opposites. So when you detect within yourself, I'm a little more anxious, I didn't sleep that well last night, and then I had like bloating after breakfast. Don't need to go to the doctor just yet, perhaps, maybe. But what you could do, before that gets out of control, it's like a runaway train, what you could do is just start to balance with opposites. Be like, okay, I'm going to skip the 13-mile uphill ski today. Instead, heaviness, right? Maybe instead of cold, crunchy, dry snacks that you've been enjoying, you cook a good, warm stew or a good warm chili or something like that. Whatever we eat in fall typically, like that's the balancing food. So nice, warm, heavier food. Staying warm, so wearing enough clothes if you had access to like a sauna or a hot tub, or just take a hot bath, something like that. Really the number one thing to balance Vata is oil, right? Because Vata is so dry, so you could cook your food with good quality oils. You could rub oil on your skin, for example, or go get a massage. Smooth, I think about that around your routine, right? So if you have a very irregular schedule, that's going to increase Vata. It's not going to be so great for you at this time when you're feeling an imbalance. So we think nice, regular, smooth routine, waking up at roughly the same time, eating your meals on a good schedule, going to bed, and going to bed early for Vata dosha, because Vata needs more rest, right? Lots of energy, but not the stamina to back it up. So we have to go to sleep at night and recharge. So that's how we would balance Vata dosha. Pitta dosha, when it goes out of balance, is going to look completely different, right? It's a fire element. So its qualities are that it's hot and sharp, intense, and dynamic. If you already have a lot of Pitta dosha, you probably like things to be sharp and intense, right? You may seek out intense experiences like, I don't know, chili eating contests or something like that. You may thrive quite well in high pressure environments, right? You actually kind of respond quite well to some stress. Not that it's good for you, but you perform well under stress. And so, let's say you are doing too much of that, eating too much hot, spicy food, it's competitiveness, right? So like competitive sports and hot temperatures or too much stress at work, your imbalance would look more like heat, excessive heat, inflammation, hyperacidity / heartburn. Whereas our vatas tend towards constipation, pittas would tend toward loose stool diarrhea. Emotionally, it looks like heat looks like anger, irritability. Remember I said very critical, right? I start to get critical of all your friends and how they're living their lives. Stress is like a common pitta dosha type of imbalance caused by stress, excessively sour and spicy foods, heat, like temperature-wise, intense exercise. So naturally, if vata dosha was increased by fall, which is dry season, pitta dosha is going to get increased in summer, which is hot season. Yeah. So summer is hot, and we also tend to be outside in Colorado more and be doing more active things. So generally, there's an increase of pitta dosha. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Right? Remember, I said earlier, kaphas feel amazing in the fall. Well, most of us feel pretty good in the summer, right? It's like we're more energized, and there's more daylight for us to go out and have fun and enjoy ourselves. So it's not a bad thing, but by the end of summer, oftentimes like people will come to me and complain that they have like inflamed skin or their eyes are like red and burning all the time, and it's almost like through June and July and August, like the heat has been building, and for some of us, we kind of start to burn out and get like depleted and sort of dried up by the end of summer as well. So summer tends to increase pitta dosha, which for some of us can be a little excessive. How do we balance? Opposites, right? We want to quench that fire. So cool, there's certain foods in Ayurveda that are considered to be cool. So not cold, that would be ice cream, right? It's been in the freezer, it's cold. Cool foods would be considered coconut is a really cooling food, right? Coconut water, fantastic. Parsley and cilantro, watermelon, mint, so mint teas, dairy, whole grains are even considered, they have a cooling effect on the physiology. So we would want more of these cooling foods, but also cooling behaviors, cooling and calming behaviors. So I always tell people if they have excess pitta and it's summer and they're just, in a blind rage, turned into the Tasmanian devil, is like, you can go outside and be active and do things that you love, but could you go and walk, go walk to a lake and then sit by the lake and look at the lake for a little while, like be around water or walk by the river or something like that. Go swimming. That's probably the most cooling of all the exercises. Calming, soft behaviors, like meditation. Not Bikram yoga. Calm, soft, slow-moving yoga, things like that. So we want to cool down the fiery pitta, calm down the fiery pitta.
And remember, whatever your dosha tends to be, you tend to want to do more of that thing.
Right.
That's pretty pitta, and I like the hot and the intense and the exercise with some coffee and all of that. And when I went to see an Ayurvedic doctor in India, he was like, you really need to think about at least taking coffee out of your regimen. But my pitta self and my lifestyle, it's like more coffee. So just like, what can I do instead? Maybe a mint tea instead of my third cup of coffee, or just recognizing those type of things.
Right, exactly. So what you like, it's usually what you're already like.
Yeah. So just be aware of that too. It's like it's not a problem. Like vatas tend to really like popcorn and chips and things that are like that. So instead of having another bag of chips, have something that's more
Sweet
heavy.
potato.
Yeah, exactly. Sweet potato. Yeah, girthier.
Exactly. And because she already has this natural fire, she's like, ooh, I'm gonna drink a cup of coffee, and I'm gonna take a really like hard, fast yoga class. None of that's wrong. Like even Ayurveda is not, like coffee's the devil. It's just like everything in moderation, and then most of us will stay mostly balanced. And for someone like Krista, it's like, sorry, are you Krista or Dr. Schwind here? Krista, okay. I'm like, did I just give them your name?
No,
So for someone like Krista, everything that she's doing is fine until if she starts to feel something like anger, right? Or she's like excessively critical of her loved ones or something like that, or heartburn. Right. Okay, and like super competitive at the gym.
Yes.
Yeah. Like then it's like, okay, maybe it's time to just like try and bring the fire under control. We're not trying to like completely extinguish anyone's natural fire, but can we like bring it down to a nice warm glow? Right. So we balance pitta with cooling. Excess pitta with cooling, right? If she's just feeling fine, she's like, hey, I'm good. Digesting all my meals, I'm not angry, I'm not critical, like that, then she's doing good. She just keeps doing what she's doing. Finally, good old Kapha dosha, which is stable and strong. It's the integrating force. Kapha dosha's imbalance looks like an increase of the earth element, right? So these people would tend towards overweight, gaining weight, even when they eat just a small amount of food. So they also often feel like the world is very unfair because their Vata friends can eat as much as they want and never gain weight. But they tend towards, small portions and still gaining weight. Depression, like I said, head colds and sinus infections. Everything that feels heavy is earth. It's excess kapha. It's caused by things that are like earth, slow moving, static lifestyles, so a lot of sitting, for example. Excessive heavy and cold foods. Ayurveda, we think of heavy foods as being often processed foods too, but like fried foods, red meats, things like that. Cheeses, heavy. And cold foods, that would be things like, ice cream, things like that. And then overeating. So they may take great comfort in food and then end up overeating. So these are some of the causes of what we would call a kapha imbalance in Ayurveda, which would be things like excess heaviness, be that physically or psychologically, emotionally. The season of increase for a kapha person, well, for all of us, actually, is late part of winter into spring. So in Colorado, the analogy is always when the snow starts to become more like sleet and heavy slush, turns into rain. We're moving more into that water element. There's a heaviness in spring. It's often hard to get out of bed at this time of year when you're shifting out of winter into spring. For all of us, we get a bit lazier, and then they've changed the clocks on us, so all of a sudden the sun doesn't come up till 8:30 or something. They make it all worse. So this would be the season that we often feel the most heavy. And in fact, a lot of us come out of winter, we have an extra coat, like a 5-pound extra coat, which is okay. It's good. We want to gather that in the winter and then metabolize it in the summer. So we kind of come out of winter feeling a bit sluggish and heavy. We balance kapha, heavy, cold, with really two primary elements: movement and heat. So air and fire is what we would think of them in Ayurveda as fire here, but it's really movement and heat. Balancing with opposites, so light and moving. Light foods, those are things like, actually popcorn would be okay for a kapha type person. Also smaller portions, right? It's not so much, here's the thing, where Ayurveda is different, I think, from our mentality, is light wouldn't mean a salad. I always think of salad is light, but salad, because it's raw, is a little harder for many of our digestions. Especially if you have a kapha type digestion, it's even harder to process raw food. So light would actually be something that's being cooked, like a bowl of vegetable soup or something easily digestible. And then movement is more of the physical, right? So everything that Krista likes, if you have a lot of kapha, you should be doing that. Go and do some competitive sports or go for a run and what else? Coffee. Like even this person will be like, okay, have a cup of coffee. Spicy food, right? So like get moving. It's not just physical exercise though, it's stimulation. So taking up new hobbies and trying new things and meeting people and being social, which you may be more of a homebody, not really want to do those things, but they would be more balancing for your nature, more dynamism in your life, and heat as well is also good. So again, hot bath, sauna, staying warm, and then nice spicy foods. This person can definitely head to the Thai restaurant and get the green curry number 5, right? So this is how we balance them, and in particular noticing that the seasons will make a shift. So you did your dosha questionnaire, and let's assume it's all 100% accurate, which is not. But if it was, your dosha type is with you your whole life. So if you're born Pitta dosha, you're going to be Pitta dosha your whole life, for example. Meaning more of a tendency toward fire element your whole life. So that doesn't change, but everything else changes, right? Everything else is changing. The seasons are influencing us. What time of day it is influencing us. So there's the individualized approach that you could start to implement some of these behaviors into your daily routine that would be specific to you, but maybe not to the people on either side of you. But then there's also general principles that Ayurveda would say are good for everyone seeking to create wellness. So there's different pillars of health depending what system you're looking at. But in Ayurveda, there's 4 general pillars of health that really we all need to be focusing on in order to reduce stress, in order to reduce our exposure to chronic illness, right? So the first one is diet. That's a big one. We'll look at these. What we're putting in our bodies, especially if the top 2 causes of death are heart disease and cancer, we know diet's important, right? Sleep is huge. In fact, I think sometimes I start to wonder if sleep should be number 1 there. It's amazing what can change for people when they just start getting enough sleep at the right time, right? So not taking a ton of naps, but going to bed early and then rising with the sun. We talked about living in harmony with nature. So when the sun's coming up, it's also time for us to get up. But when it's down, it's time for us to be settling and getting ready for bed.
Exactly what college students look like, right? Go to bed when the sun goes down, rise with it, right?
Right? That's what I did in college.
Yeah.
But you know, here's the thing: is like if we're talking about stress, we talked about the causes of stress. What's happening in your physiology when you're stressed is your body's producing adrenaline and cortisol as a response mechanism to pressures. But it's also producing things like adrenaline and cortisol to keep you awake, right? We know that we need adrenaline. It's like a surge that gets us going. When you stay awake for really long periods of time, even if you don't get up that early, but then you stay up till like 2 a.m., you're asking your body to keep producing adrenaline so that you can stay up until 2 a.m. So not getting enough sleep, even if you're like, hey, I'm pretty good, I go to yoga and I meditate and I eat vegetables, if you're not getting enough sleep, your body is for sure producing more adrenaline than is probably great for your organs to be processing. So you're creating stress, even if you're like, hey, I'm pretty chill actually. You're definitely producing adrenaline to stay awake longer. When we get to the circadian clock, I'll show you some science behind that. So not getting enough sleep or forcing your body to produce adrenaline by staying up late is definitely going to add to stress. And then your body gets into the habit, right? Whatever you train your body to do, it will do. So if you train it to produce adrenaline and stay up, it will, and you might feel pretty good, right? It's like you almost like it forgets that capacity to get sleepy and go to bed. So sleep is huge. Movement, I think more and more, even in Ayurveda, we're recognizing that like exercise is super, super important. It's getting moving. And what kind of movement is appropriate depends on your dosha type. So we'll look at those. Not everyone should be running marathons, but everyone does need to be moving. And we're living in an increasingly static existence where I hope this is shifting. But until now, it's for a long time, a job has looked like spending 8 hours a day sitting, and I don't think that's so great for, we can get rest in other ways, like taking a restorative yoga class or something. but I think we need to be moving our bodies more. And then Ayurveda is a consciousness-based approach, so meditation of some kind would be a means of accessing the really refined layers of the physiology, so that you're making good decisions about yourself, and you're checking in with yourself, and I do feel a little excess fire today, what can I do differently? So, what I have for you are just some general suggestions about each of those pillars. Diet, it's important, right? Whatever you're putting in your body is going to affect you. In fact, you're constantly building your tissues out of the experiences that you're putting in, food, emotions, etc. And I think now, like, modern science is catching up to this idea. It's like, first of all, we just had a brain in our heads. Then we realized that there was also quite a lot of neurons in your heart. And now it's like, whoa, there's a brain in your gut as well. And that's being triggered by the food that you're eating to release certain hormones into the body. So in fact, serotonin, your happy hormone, is released from your gut brain, right? Not to say there aren't things you could do with your head brain that would help to increase serotonin, right? You can think thoughts of gratitude, that can do that. But serotonin is produced largely by your gut brain. So modern science is starting to recognize what Ayurveda always said in kind of an antiquated way. The diet is super important. So, dosha specific, what does that mean? It's everything that we just looked at, right? So, for Vata dosha, taking foods that are heavier and have more oil, like natural oils. Pitta dosha, staying away from the super hot, intense foods, and more, remember I said like coconut, parsley, and whatever else I said, cooling foods. And then Kapha dosha needs to be eating like light, digestible, spicy foods. The 60-20-20 rule is something I made up. And then this rule, if you look at your plate, 60% cooked vegetables, 20% whole grains, that would be things like rice or barley or quinoa or farro grains, something like that. And then the other 20% would be lean protein, so it could be chicken or salmon or lentils, beans, something like that. So generally for most of us, you could say, like, eat more vegetables would be one way of looking at that. And a nice dynamic, diverse diet is a good idea. So try to get different kinds of vegetables, different kinds of whole grains. I said cooked vegetables. Generally in Ayurveda, we promote cooking your food first. There was a book that came out in 2012. I think it's called Catching Fire, where they talk about how human evolution, particularly the evolution of our brains, was spurred by the invention of fire, cooking your food, right? So when we started to cook our food and our primate cousins didn't, we all of a sudden had all this energy that we'd been using to digest uncooked food, I don't know, nuts and berries and mammoth meat, mammoth jerky and things like that. All of that energy that we needed to process that hard to digest food suddenly could go to evolving our brains. So we got the bigger brains, right? So yes, the raw food movement is very popular. Ayurveda would actually say more cooked food, easier to digest, allows more energy for your organs to do their jobs, right? So like your liver is an organ of detoxification. You can't detox your liver, like no matter how expensive a product you buy. That's what it does, is it detoxes your body. But it's going to do a better job of that if you're not asking it to process a lot of heavy, hard to digest foods, processed foods, things like that. So that's my general rule of thumb. It's 60-20-20. Vegetables are the 60, whole grains and lean proteins. And then eating at the appropriate time is super important. So you can eat all the healthy food in the world and you can cook it just right. But if you're eating in the middle of the night, it's not so great for your body, or like eating right before bed is kind of tough for your body. Once you fall asleep, it's not going to digest as well. So Ayurveda would say, when you wake up, just a light breakfast. Right? Maybe just some fruits and whole grains, something like that. Biggest meal in the middle of the day. So the way that they do often in Spain and Mediterranean countries, you have a big lunch in the middle of the day. It's when your digestive, we call it digestive fire in Ayurveda, right? Anytime we're talking about processing anything in Ayurveda, we view it through the lens of the fire element. So we think of the digestion or processing your food as being a fire. And we would say that fire is burning most brightly in the middle of the day when the sun is burning most brightly in the sky, right? So we're connecting with nature. So this would be a great time to eat your biggest meal. If you eat meat, which is harder to digest, eat it then. And then not eating too late. So trying to have dinner by like 7:30, not too heavy food, giving yourself enough time to digest before you go to bed. Appropriate quantity. You don't want to eat until you're stuffed and you have a tummy ache. It's too much. You have to leave a little bit of space in your belly for peristalsis to happen, which is just muscles moving the food down the digestive tract and then mixing the food in your stomach. So you have to leave some space, or the muscles can't move. But you also don't want to get to where you're like absolutely ravenous and like looking to bite someone's head off or something like that. Like that can be a little stressful for your physiology too. So I would say wait until you get hungry. Hunger is your body's way of telling you it's ready to digest food. Don't wait till you're too hungry. And then don't eat until you're too full, too stuffed. And that might be something you have to like retrain in, right? We've got used to we just eat on a schedule and we eat until our plate is empty and we're not actually checking in with your body's cues, right? So it's just a little more like inward listening. Eating in a settled environment, so not scrolling through Facebook, not watching the news, not having an argument, not eating while you're on the go or driving, right? It's just asking your body to do so many things at once. So when you want to digest food, you don't have to be in complete silence, but you could be with people that you enjoy their company and turn off the TV and just relax and enjoy. Fresh, warm, organic when possible, food that's pleasing to the senses. So Ayurveda would say like eat delicious food, eat things for the most part that you love, just not too much. Not too much sour and spicy foods for the pittas. Sit for a few minutes after you eat. This is another thing that's like in America, it's like they bring you the bill and they bring you your main course and the bill at the same time. Like I'm gonna need about 45 minutes here. So you wanna sit, like last bite, sit for 5 to 10 minutes, and then take a short walk after your meals. It's so lovely. I was with friends in Boulder yesterday. We got to walk up and down Pearl Street after we ate, and you know, it's helping that peristalsis happening where there's just gentle movement in the body. You don't want to go for a run right after a meal, but walking. And then the digestive spices. So this is something Ayurveda has always said. And now there's starting to be modern studies that are showing that these spices assist in our epigenetic processes. Epigenetics being, you guys have heard of this, right? So it's like you might have a genetic tendency towards certain chronic illnesses, for example, but the way that you live can either stimulate or suppress that genetic response to stress. So modern studies are starting to show that these spices like ginger and black pepper and cumin, coriander and fennel and turmeric, that these will assist you in suppressing some of those genetic responses that we don't want and stimulating the ones that we do want. Plus they're delicious. And then like ancient terms, they would say, well, these have more of the fire elements, so they assist in that digestive fire process. Sleep, very important. What's called evening vigil in Ayurveda, which means starting to settle before bed. So I'm sure we've all been guilty of like those last couple hours before bed, like just being in front of a screen, right? Or whether it's computer or TV or your phone. All the way up until we fall asleep. It's not so great to have that light projecting into your eyes. In order for your body to sleep, you must produce melatonin, and melatonin is not secreted without darkness. So anytime that's the thing about our artificial existence now, is that we can have all the lights on in the house until 12 o'clock at night and be looking at a screen which is projecting more light into our eyes. It's inhibiting the secretion of melatonin, the hormone that will help you sleep. So if you tend to be on a screen, I mean, I know as a student I was on the screen till late at night, but if you tend to be on the screen till late at night and you're not sleeping well, that would be the first thing to change, would be quietening down the last couple of hours before bed. I'll turn off as many lights as I can and just have like lamps on, no screen time, reading, and just trying to settle generally. I don't know if you can do lights out by 10, but one day, just earmark this for like later in life. But 10 o'clock would be a good time to get to bed. We'll see why in a little while. But getting to bed at a reasonable hour and then waking up with the sun-ish. I mean, right now that's like 7:30-ish, so you could wake up a bit before the sun at this time of year, but in the winter when it's rising later, you could get more sleep. But starting to attune to the rhythms of the sun, just like we used to, right, before we had electricity. And avoiding naps, unless you're ill. When you're sick, that would be like the time that we would say take a nap and get more rest. Third pillar was movement. So just in the same way, you would have a dosha specific diet, bringing in more of the opposite qualities. Like for vata it was heavier foods, for pitta it was cooling foods, for kapha it was light heating foods. Same with movement. Like we should all be moving every day, but depending on what came up as your predominant dosha and what you're feeling will determine whether movement's like a gentle yoga class and a walk, or like a 10-mile run or something like that, more dynamic. Generally for vatas, we say yoga and walking is great. So very light body type, light disposition, maybe more prone to like crash and burn exhaustion. Yoga and walking is great for you. Pittas have a bit more stamina, right? So they can kind of do everything. But they're prone to like a little bit more competitive and like a little bit more aggressive. And actually I think pittas are the ones I most often see as a yoga teacher get injured because they're like, I'm going to do 10 push-ups instead of 1 or something like that every time. So they kind of tend to push it. They're competitive, and it's like they tear ligaments and things like that and have to get their knees reconstructed. So I did not do that in yoga, FYI. So for pittas, I would say like try to do things that aren't super competitive. Probably avoid the really hot yoga, like the 108-degree yoga. It's probably a little bit too much. Maybe on a really cold day or something. If you're in nature, can you be by water? Which in Colorado, again, there's often a river or a lake we can be around. You can take things like running and hiking and all of that, like certainly, but maybe avoiding like hot sun in the middle of the day. And swimming is the best one because you're submerged in cool water. So I always recommend swimming. Kaphas are more prone to heaviness. They don't really want to get going, but once we can get them going, they can do it all. They can run marathons, ride their bikes, they can do hot yoga, everything. They're probably not particularly competitive, but that would be like all the competitive sports would be great. So dosha specific is good. If you're not sure, you just see how you feel afterwards.
Would hot yoga and mountain you guys go over kapha because they have so much heat?
Kapha's earth and water, so they tend to be like heavy. Yeah, pittas are the fiery ones that we don't want doing super hot yoga. Makes sense? Yoga is good for everybody, so that's good news. Not all yoga is created equally though, so you want to watch the temperature and how fast-paced it is. Brisk walking is great for everybody. We're bipeds, we've evolved this way, so we want to be walking. Using the car less, walking, or riding your bike around town. And then if you can do movement in nature, even better. All the way back at the beginning, we had that quote from Dr. John Deweyard, who said, in order for us to survive, we need to be living in accordance with like nature's laws, right? Living with nature. The more you can be out on the trail with like soft earth underfoot, like I'll touch the trees on my way by. So much of what we touch now is artificial. Like you go a whole day and touch nothing that's not man-made. So being out and just touching the trees and breathing in the fresh air is all the better, just to tune in, right? And then you see nature changing, and she's not hanging on. She's done with her leaves. She just lets them go. It's like, oh, maybe I could let go of some stuff too, right? She's like always teaching us. And then pillar number 4 was meditation. The good news is there's tons of research supporting the benefits of meditation. The bad news is most of the research is crap. Most of the research is done on transcendental meditation, which is why I have it listed here. And I can't even tell you, like, yeah, the randomized trials with hundreds and hundreds of people, but the research is not that great in meditation. But there is research that has shown things like decreased blood pressure, reduced use of some of those risk behaviors like alcohol and tobacco, lowering of high cholesterol. So this was like the big myth of the 80s was that high cholesterol came from eating saturated fats and things like that. And like, sure, like a lot of those foods aren't very good for you, but high cholesterol is usually coming from a stress response, making your liver produce more cholesterol. We're talking about like the bad cholesterol. So you can lower it then through diet. It's never a bad thing to change your diet if you're eating lots of processed foods, but through meditation, oxidization of fat, of lipids, and then of course decrease psychosocial stress. So just taking 5 minutes a day, maybe 10 minutes a day. One of my favorite apps is called Insight Timer. It's a free app. They have thousands of guided meditations. So if you've never done meditation, you don't know where to start, you can download Insight Timer, and you can just scroll through and find one. Like, I only giving 5 minutes to this because I don't know what it is. Like, you can just scroll through and find a 5-minute one. They have great meditations on there, so I recommend that. But just for me, it's like starting to just spend 5 or 10 or 20 minutes a day. Just think about tuning in, right? Where you're not scrolling through your phone or meeting external obligations or putting anything in your body. You're just sitting for a little while. And then for everybody, general daily routine. This is called dinacharya in Sanskrit. It's the idea of having general daily routine. What I've done is I've listed the perfect Ayurvedic routine on the left, and then I put next to it the circadian rhythms to see how this actually informs or backs up a lot of what's said and has always been said for thousands of years by Ayurveda. So Ayurveda would say, wake up with the sun. You can wake up before the sun too, but we don't really want to be sleeping late in the day. And you can see, according to the circadian rhythm, which is like the 24-hour clock that's kind of always running in the background of your physiology, like your organs are running on this circadian rhythm, is like right here around 6:45, there's like the sharpest rise in your blood pressure. So it's been low, you've been sleeping. It naturally starts to rise right around this time when the sun, depending on the time of year, is coming up or getting ready to come up. And it stops secreting melatonin around 7:30 a.m. So you wake up at 6:45, let's say. You're a little more energized because your heart rate is up, but you're still kind of sluggish because your body's going to take another 45 minutes or so to stop secreting that sleep hormone. So Ayurveda would say get up around the time that the blood pressure comes up and you're starting to dissolve some of that melatonin. And then the first thing that we would do in Ayurveda is clean your tongue. So you can buy a tongue scraper for.
Tongue scrapers?
So I don't have one. Do you love it?
Yeah, I've just always done it.
Always done it, yeah.
People usually are like, when I give them that one thing, they're like, I love the tongue scraper. Now when I go camping, I'll pack it. You can use a spoon. Yeah, you can buy a tongue scraper. I think honestly I saw them on Etsy for like $1. And I'm sure the stores around here probably sell them. It's just a metal, this shaped thing. You just scrape your tongue. So if you're not used to doing it, you may not know that when you wake up your tongue's kind of gross. It's like got a white coating on it. Ayurveda thinks of this as just being the byproduct of your natural overnight liver cleansing process. So it's doing its housekeeping while you're sleeping, leaves a little bit of residue on your tongue. You wake up, scrape it off, breath is better, you do feel magically better. So we always do that first. And then the sinuses, this kind of depends on you, but a lot of us would take a little dropper. Again, you could buy these for like $1. A little dropper bottle and fill it with like a sesame oil. And then lie back, so like when I wake up in the morning, I'll just kind of roll over so my head's hanging off the edge of the bed and just drop some oil into each nose and then sniff it up into your sinuses. So it kind of lubricates sinus passages. If you tend towards congestion in your sinuses, give that a shot. It might make a big difference.
Julia, it's my fault, but I didn't tell you they ended 3:15 instead of 4.
Oh, okay. Well, this is actually the next slide's the last
exactly
one.
right. That's why I
Thanks for
figured
telling me.
Let
Is the bell gonna ring? Is
No,
that
we
a
don't have
thing?
a bell.
I'm like so excited about being in a collegiate environment. Usually in a yoga studio. All the yoga people are eating like dry, crunchy snacks, and I'm just mad at them.
To talk to you guys today. We went to yoga studio Vail, so.
We meditate. We sip a cup of warm water. If you're dependent on coffee to get your bowels moving in the morning, warm water does the same thing for almost everyone. So you could try switching it out. Or do your warm water first, then have your cup of coffee. Light breakfast we talked about. Can you get moving in the morning? Because here, melatonin's like still secreting, so we're still kind of sluggish. A lot of people find if they wake up and just get on the couch and like start watching John Oliver or whatever, then they're kind of sluggish the whole day, right? So that's actually a great time to go and do a yoga practice or go out for a run or a brisk walk or whatever your favorite exercise is. I don't know, Zumba or something. Just get moving at that time while you're still secreting a little bit of melatonin so you don't take that sluggishness into the day. We talked about the meal times already, but I was saying have your big meal in the middle of the day because the fire is highest. Circadian rhythm says the same thing. You're most alert and fiery between the hours of 10 and 2:30. So actually this is a good time to have this class, right? It starts at 2. You have the best coordination and concentration in the middle of the day when the fire is high in the sky, it's high in your physiology, you can digest more food. And then if you look at the circadian rhythm, there's other interesting things, like you should Google this if you never have. Like you have the most cardiovascular efficiency and muscular strength early evening, so that's another good time to exercise. But you'll see that your blood pressure is highest around 6:30, so it's good to be done with exercise by then. And then your melatonin production naturally would start to come back in about 9 o'clock. So that'd be a good time to start your evening vigil and begin to wind down so you can get a good night's sleep. Not produce too much adrenaline or cortisol, wake up less stress, less risk for developing chronic disease, right? Last slide, we're so good at this. I have 1 minute and 34 seconds. So I gave you the definitions earlier of health and wellness from organizations like the Dictionary and the World Health Organization. So Shruta Samhita, which is one of the early Ayurvedic texts, would describe someone who is healthy, svasta, as being one who is established in self. Think of that as just you're waking up in the morning and tuning in to your body's cues and signals. Who has balanced the doshas, right? You've balanced earth and water and fire and air and space within yourself through your diet and routine.